So Daybell found guilty of conspiracy in the attempted murder of her ex-nephew, nephew-in-law, Brandon Boudreau. And so we all know about Laurie Vallow Daybell. Um, she was found guilty a few years ago of murdering her two children, Tylee and JJ. She was also found guilty in the murder or the conspiracy to murder her current husband's deceased wife. She was also found guilty in the murder of her ex-husband, uh, Charles Vallow, and now she's found guilty in the conspiracy to commit murder case against her ex-nephew-in-law, Brandon Boudreau. Now, if you didn't keep up with that court case, the most powerful evidence, there were two pieces of powerful evidence that I believe convicted her. One was Brandon's testimony. He spoke about the day and what happened. Laurie tried to undermine that by saying, oh, his window shattered, but nobody else other than him supposedly heard a gunshot, which was a lie because the Ring doorbell camera across the road, you can see Brandon's car pulling in or going past the neighbor's house, and then there's a bang, and it's clearly a gunshot. So for her to say it didn't happen was ridiculous. Where the conspiracy came in was her brother is the one who's alleged to have done the shooting. Thankfully, it missed Brandon Boudreau, but it shattered his window in his car. And so where the conspiracy comes in and where they were able to prove Laurie's participation, there were two main things, I think, that really possibly sold it to the jury. The piece of evidence was that Alex, the brother, the shooter, had bought a burner cell phone, and there was, I think, video evidence of Laurie being around at that time when he went to the place to buy the burner cell phone. Anyway, and his and her phones tracked back to their house after the burner cell phone was bought. So there's that. That's just a tiny indicator. But then when the burner cell phone that apparently Alex had traveled to where the shooting took place, his normal cell phone was always in the same vicinity as Laurie's cell phone. So basically, she had his cell phone with her, pretending that he was still in the city that she was in. And then on the day of the shooting, she made a call to his cell phone, the shooter's cell phone, to make it look like they were having this conversation, 24-minute conversation. Which the police said was just fake and to fake an alibi. So there was the cell phone data. And how did they know that the burner phone belonged to Alex? Well, he linked it to his Gmail account. So it was clearly he was the one who was in the location where the shooting happened. So that was her giving him an alibi. And then the other piece of evidence that I thought was very, very powerful, when several people saw that Jeep. So the neighbor across the road saw the Jeep that the alleged murderer was hiding in, and they saw the Jeep parked outside of the person, Brandon's house. The Jeep was there for ages, and they noticed there was no tire on the back of the Jeep. When Brandon pulled into his driveway just before he was shot at, he also noticed the Jeep with Texas plates with no wheel on the back, which is unusual. Struck him as unusual because the Jeep usually has a spare tire on the back. And then you've got surveillance video in a self-storage unit rented by Laurie of her and Alex taking, I think they took the spare tire into the storage unit before the shooting happened. And then after the shooting, it was her and I think Charles Vallow taking the tire back out of the storage unit. And so they're very neatly tied in. And the other thing was that Alex, the shooter, actually paid to have the Jeep's windows tinted to a darker tint, obviously to hide whoever was inside. And that Jeep was, they believe, was Laurie's Jeep. Used to be her dead husband's Jeep, but anyway. So those kind of things all tied in together. And the prosecution presented a very logical, cogent story. Laurie defended herself. She tried to She tried to argue that there was no proof that any shooting ever happened. She suggested that Brandon had made the damage to his own vehicle by hitting it with a tire iron. It was just, she was really all over the place, and she tried to really resist being in that courtroom. She tried to resist having that particular judge. She did all sorts of shenanigans to try and get out of it. She pretended she was sick, and then the judge made her be examined by the police not the police, the jail doctors, to say that she wasn't sick. Anyway, she was a real nightmare to have in the courtroom. But her case that she presented was basically nobody knows that there was a gunshot because nobody else heard it other than Brandon. So presumably he's making up that somebody shot at him, even though straight after it happened, he was on the phone to 911, and you can just hear the panic in his voice. And of course, the reason why he was so panicked was because he already knew that the two children had been killed, and also that Charles Vallow, Laurie's husband, had been killed. And there was a lot of discussion in the family that Laurie was part of whoever had done the murdering of these other people. And so he was scared for his life, and rightly so. The other piece of information was that his then wife had a lot to do with Laurie, and his then wife was the only person who knew his new address because he had just moved in a day or two before. And his then wife, Melanie, had been spending time with Laurie, and that was probably how Laurie knew where he was located. Anyway, so she's been convicted, conspiracy to commit murder. Her other defense was, nobody heard me talk to Alex, my brother, the shooter, about this. That's not required. The prosecutor set out a very easy to follow story and timeline, and Laurie was just basically saying, well, you don't have me on tape conspiring. Anyway, so she's found guilty. The next thing that is going to happen is that she will be sentenced, I believe, in July or August, and it's going to be probably life in jail. Now, she's already got several sentences against her, life in jail without parole, for the other murders that she's been found guilty of. Now, remember, the jury, when they heard this case, did not know that she's already been found guilty of murder. And so some of the things that she tried to argue that she's a good person. And the prosecution kept saying, if she argues that, I will be allowed to bring in the fact that she's already convicted of 4 prior murders. So she kind of skated on thin ice, and that prior convictions never actually came in. But the jury is going to be very surprised when they learn that, because the way they questioned the juries to start off with, they made sure that none of the jurors knew of her prior convictions. They had to ask it in a very subtle way, because obviously you can't say to them, do you know that she's a prior convicted murderer? Obviously, because then that gives out the information. But yeah, the idea is to have a jury pool that doesn't know her history. And then one of the questions that I've received quite a lot is, why would they bother to bring this case? Because obviously it's expensive. Why would the state bother to bring this case when she's already been found guilty of 4 prior murders? She's going to spend the rest of her life in jail. And there's a couple of reasons. One is justice for the victim. Okay, Brandon nearly lost his life that day, and it's important that he's not just swept under the rug. It's important that his horror is recognized. So that there's one of that. It's for the victim to get the satisfaction and the knowledge that this person is not getting away with it, and that everybody knows what she did. That's the one aspect. The other aspect is a little bit more practical, because she of course is appealing her previous convictions, and if for whatever reason those previous convictions get thrown out, maybe there's a technicality or something like that. It happens from time to time. The more convictions she's got, even if 1 or 2 of those prior ones are thrown out, the current one will still remain. So she's going to spend her entire life, the rest of her life, in jail, where she belongs. She's not going to be able to wreak havoc on any other people. And it's so interesting, but tragic and weird and just disturbing, that the people in her life that she's killed have all been very, very close family members. You know, it's unlike a normal serial killer where they will have a type and they'll go after somebody who reminds them of their mother or whatever it is. They'll have a type. For Laurie, it's anybody who was in her way. And there's just one sort of addendum is her very first husband, Joe, I think it was Joe Ryan, he died, and that was considered to be natural causes. And there's some discussion and some talk as to whether it was natural causes or whether that was her first victim. And I don't think anybody will know because I believe that his body was cremated. So there's no way that we can go back and test for poison or whatever it was. And so there's a suspicion that she's even guilty of even more. And having a look at the evidence that came out in this case, do I believe that she actually did it and that they proved that she did it? Yes, I do believe she actually did it from the evidence that was presented in court, not just the hype all around it, but the evidence that was presented in court. And I believe the guilty verdict was the correct one. It was sound. It was properly proven. And she didn't really have a defense other than to say, they didn't catch me on camera. But actually they did. They caught her on camera taking that tire, the spare tire of the Jeep into the storage unit and then bringing it back out. And the timing of that was just before the attempted murder and then just after again. And so that was very telling. Anyway, my lovelies, have a fantastic day and keep safe. I'll see you on the next one. Oh, please leave me a comment because that really helps out the channel. And subscribe if you haven't and like if you do.